West Fargo's probably.
Diversion Authority Finance Committee meeting for August 25th. Appreciate everybody's attendance. Don, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Here.
Dr. Mahoney.
Here.
Mr. Peterson. Mr. Jacobson.
Here.
Mr. Costin.
Here.
Ms. Johnson.
Here.
Mr. Redlinger. Mr. Steen.
Here.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Here.
Mayor Carlson.
Here.
Mr. Reeds.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Thank you, Don. The next order of business is to approve the minutes from July 21st, 2021 meeting. They have been distributed.
So moved.
Thank you,
Second.
Mr. Steen. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mayor Mahoney. It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of July 21st. This can be a voice vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carried. Thank you, Finance Committee. Item number 3 is to approve the minutes of August 9th, 2021 special meeting. They have been distributed.
So moved.
Jacobson, motion to approve.
Thank you. Mr. Jacobson moves.
Second.
Mayor Carlson seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of August 9th, 2021 as distributed. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried. The next order of business is item number 4, is to approve the order of the agenda. It has been distributed. You have it in front of you.
Move to approve the order of the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Steen. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Costin. It's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda as distributed. We again can do a voice vote on this. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Item number 5 is the approval of the bills. We'll call on Mr. Kent Costin.
Thank you, Chair. For the month of August, we have a total of $9,301,741.40. The stakeholder reimbursements are listed there for the City of Fargo, Cass County, Clay County, along with legal bills and a few other incidentals. So I would stand for questions if there are any, and otherwise a motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Costin. We have a motion, but I'll ask if there's any questions from Mr. Costin before we move forward.
I have a question, Chair.
Mayor Carlson, please.
For the City of Fargo bill, I noticed that there were, apologize, I'm just finding administrative fees that were put forth into the bill. And I don't believe that we have received information to explain what those actual costs were and the reasons justified for those administrative fees. So I would move to remove those administrative fees out of the bill, pay the remaining portion, but I think the administrative fees need to be taken out.
I have 2 motions on the floor. I'm going to call the first one out of order because we didn't have discussion. We'll go to Mayor Carlson's motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Steen seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the bills excluding the administrative fee as presented in the bill's report.
Mr. Chair.
Is there any discussion?
Please.
Please, Mr.
Say,
Steen.
And the question I would have is this still the 4% number?
Yeah, it just for the sake of clarity and transparency, this issue is being batted around between administration and this board and this group, and it just has not been resolved based upon the most recent communications. We discussed that at the City Finance Committee meeting last month. I was directed to turn it in with administration included, assuming that there had been some verbal discussions about this issue. So I'm following protocol as I'm being directed by my employer. If there needs to be more discussion on it or some form of justification, again, as a reminder, the meeting that we had a couple of months ago, looking for clarity about that. As it sits right now, that fee is part of our infrastructure funding policy, the City of Fargo, and we assess that as an oversight fee on any contract that we administer. And because we're administering the in-town levy projects independent of Jacobs, we feel it's a legitimate process and practice, that it follows our policy. And I know that's being debated, and I don't know if it needs to continue to be debated or if it can just be resolved somehow with Joel. I think there has been some dialogue with Joel, and I'm not sure exactly where he lands on this, but I've been directed to turn the fee in. So that's my report.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. Mr. Steen?
Say, and this has been a long time since we had that meeting back in January or whenever it was, and, you know, it was a long meeting. We had a lot of discussion going on there, and I thought what we were going to do at the conclusion of that meeting, Kent, was that we were going to, city was going to come back with some justification for the 4%. And has that
That
happened?
has not happened.
Okay.
Yeah.
And any reason, I mean,
Mr.
any reason
Chairman.
why we haven't done, that hasn't occurred?
Workload.
Okay. Is there any further discussion?
Mr.
Mayor
Chairman.
Mahoney?
I think there's some confusion on this issue because John Shockley and Joel wanted to clarify O&M charges, some type of contract or something we were doing, and we wanted to get that done. Further discussion with Joel, when I had discussions with Joel, he said the 4% was still in. So I think there's some confusion on what Rick is asking is, did you show with justification for your billing? And I think that's confusing right now because Kent doesn't know exactly what they now want or you want. And so what happened in our meeting in January, obviously, I think the feeling of the group was it was out. I was talking to Joe, we have a contract on something else that was clarified on O&M. And I think when we've had discussions, this never had another discussion. So we had our meeting in January, and in fairness to Kent, we never had a follow-up discussion of that to go over this. So Nathan Beerbaum's salary, different things that are part of this fee, you're not paying right now. So that I think there's a little confusion. It's just not an add-on. It's actually paying for people's times, effort, finance department, different things. There was another negotiated fee. I think there's some charge that you guys have talked about recently that you.
Well, this committee and the Diversion Authority approved a fiscal agent services agreement for $192,000. That was intended to be compensation for our finance staff and our finance functions. It had nothing to do with our engineering staff, our engineering functions, our oversight of contracts, that type of thing. So you need to delineate in your own mind what we're being compensated for. And I think the 4% is being directed at that engineering, contract management type oversight on those contracts, because we do turnkey and we turn it in, and, you know, the projects are done and completed on behalf of the authority, and we should be compensated. Now, whether you think it's 4% is too rich, that's probably to be debated, but I just leave it there, just in your own minds, how you choose to sort this out. I think that's the issue.
Thank you, Mr. Costa. Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Because there is still some confusion around this and there isn't solidarity in opinion as far as what can be put into the bill, if it's O&M, if it's actual cost, if it's some type of document stating the specific reasons, I think that at least to be able to move forward and at least get the majority of the bill paid for Fargo, that was why I submitted the motion as I did. And I would ask maybe our executive director maybe could convene a meeting to at least try to have a discussion specific to this issue so it can get resolved, and we can move forward and not have to revisit it again in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Steen?
I'll
And then-
defer to Mr. Paulson.
Okay, Mr. Paulson?
I'll just make some suggestions for the committee. We have reimbursement resolutions with the member entities, but we don't have a reimbursement resolution with the city of Fargo. So they're using their existing policies and how they interact with, the entities that they interact with. But I would really probably suggest that that this committee and the board determine what a policy would be, and we get that reimbursement resolution in place, because that's really what I worry about is just, looking at this from a performance standpoint and making sure that we have paper trails that cover everything. Mayor Mahoney is right. We do have an administrative fee for some of the O&M functions and reimbursements that we deal with the city of Fargo on. But we do have a draft reimbursement resolution, I think, and this is, from my understanding, this is maybe one of the last remaining things that we need to get that in place. I think really that would guide us to get resolution to this, but it's, from my standpoint, it's a policy issue. I mean, the DA will do whatever is determined in the resolutions, and so if Kent and I could maybe talk about this all day, but we're not going to be able to come up with a solution. So.
Mr. Steen?
No, I don't disagree. You guys could talk all day and not come to an agreement because you got, two different perspectives of what's going on here. But I thought that's why we had that meeting in January. It was a long meeting in January. We talked a lot, and I thought the resolution was, and I could be mistaken, but I thought the resolution was the city of Fargo will come back to us with something to justify the 4% and basically some type of cost analysis or allocation, that type of thing. That's what I thought the resolution was. And we haven't had a bill since January, I don't think, right? So it's the first bill since January. And so, again, I look at this, and Shelley, thanks for pointing it out, is that where's the resolution? What happened to that resolution, and not written resolution, but the conclusion of that meeting where we said we're going to come up with something to justify the 4%? Because we're sitting here going 4%, we're paying, what was it, 9 before? I can't even remember the number. 10% before, and that was probably appropriate at the time. I would suggest it wasn't. It isn't, because I don't know. And I don't know if the 4% is appropriate. I just don't know. And that was kind of what we talked about in January, that let's put something on the table so we know what's appropriate. And there's, I don't want to rehash the January meeting because we spent an hour and a half at that time or whatever it was talking about that meeting. If we have to have another meeting to get through this, then we should do that. But I thought we kind of did that once already. So I don't know. I think, Shelley, your motion was go ahead and pay all the costs, but until we get some type of resolution on the administrative fee or some type of support, and then we should maybe withhold that. I think that's your.
Mr. Chairman.
Any more? Please, Mr. Mahoney.
So just if we both concur that that might have been a solution that was given in January, then is it fair to get to a resolution? Joel, Kent would meet, come to a number, bring it back to this committee? Or would be some of the members of this committee also are in that meeting with Joel to ascertain, yes, it's justified or not?
I think it would be well, my own personal opinion, it should come back to the finance committee. I mean, to put Joel in a position to say, agree with Mr. Mahoney, that Mayor Mahoney, this is reasonable, that's unfair to Joel. If it's a policy issue, issues should come from the board. It's not an administrative issue per se.
Mayor Mahoney, it's a great question, and, the fact that we have the luxury of having the Diversion Authority chairman on our finance committee, I don't believe it's the finance committee's protocol that we appoint a committee on this very important issue to discuss, and I'd defer to Mayor Carlson as the chairman of the Diversion Authority that, that way we can get all the right entities, everybody at the table that has an opinion.
But I would say that when Joel's negotiated all our other contracts, he's the one that's brought the final product to this committee that we've approved. We've had no board members help Joel negotiate with Jacobs. We've had nobody helping you with any of your negotiations on anything else. So you might get a little political when we have people from our board to go on this. And in my mind, if you have a CEO and he negotiates a contract and it's fair, why should we get involved with that?
I would, if I may,
Please,
tend to disagree. We've had a lot of discussion over the contracts with our contractors. With this amount of area, we sent it back they raised the increases in compensation percentage, the inflation adjustment. We've had a lot over the time, a lot of discussion at this level of what's fair in those contracts. And we still will have some more, because I know there's new contracts coming up. We don't just let Joel run with the contracts. I think it's our responsibility to make sure they're appropriate. And this is just another contract.
Mayor.
Just to respond to your question, Mayor Dardis, I do think that it is, and also Joel, that this is a policy that probably needs to just be determined, and I think bringing it to the Finance Committee, since this has to do with our finances, would be the appropriate place to bring it. And then it could then be brought, a recommendation that could be brought to the full board.
Thank you, Mayor. Is there any further discussion? Again, we do have a motion on the table. Let's try and keep our focus on the motion. The motion is to pay the bills as presented by Mr. Costin this month with the exclusion of the 4% administrative fee that is noted on a line item in throughout. So is there any further discussion specifically on the
Mayor, I
details of
thought
the
it was
motion?
just to pull the Fargos. I didn't think it was to approve the motion. Did you double motion that?
Yes.
I thought you were just pulling City of Fargo's out.
I'm sorry.
I thought your initial motion was just to pull the City of Fargo's building out.
Yeah, my initial
Administrative fee of
motion,
4% out.
Yes.
yes,
Correct.
that is correct.
Is that not what I said?
And I seconded that,
You said approve the bills plus pull it out.
Less the.
less the administrative fee.
Okay,
Less
can
the
I ask you to split that motion, please?
What?
The reason I'd like to split the motion, I may agree with the rest of the bills and want to vote yes for that, but I will vote against pulling our bills out. If you split the motion and just say pull the City of Fargo's administrative fee out, that's one motion. And then to pay the rest of the bills, that'd be a secondary motion.
Oh. Oh, I see what you're saying. I understand.
Yep, yep.
I have a motion on the table. The motion stands as it is unless the second and the motion maker will agree to that.
I will amend my motion to split number 5 on the agenda of approval bills. My first motion would be to approve the City of Fargo, just looking at the City of Fargo's bill, less the administrative fees.
And then your second motion would be to pay all the rest of the bill. And that's agreeable to
Is
the
that all right?
second?
Is that all right with the second?
If I understand, that's consistent with what Mayor is asking for, yeah.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to ask.
You want to move on to pay the rest of the bills as well, right?
Yes.
Mayor,
That's
would
right.
you make the motion so it's clear to everyone?
How would you like it stated?
Motion would be to split the two motions, so you'd vote on one first would be which to pull out.
Give me one motion.
That'd be, I can't give you one motion because I can't vote against it then. The only reason to split a motion is so you can vote for all the bills on one, and then on the secondary one where you're pulling our administrative fees, I can actually vote no. So it actually is two motions.
Yep, and I already made the first motion with
Yeah,
in
if you
in
split the
reference-
motion, what it means, you vote on your first one and then you voted your second one, they're separate two bills, so. And Bernie wants one motion, so you want one motion, and,
I think this is as clear as mud.
yeah,
So,
no.
my one motion is to take out the City of Fargo's bill, pay for that minus the administrative fee. So that is my first motion.
Second.
I have a motion and a second.
And this just pertains to the City of Fargo bills.
Is there any discussion with regard to the submittal of bills from the city of Fargo that we pay all the bills less the administrative fee? Any further discussion? Hearing none. Don, would you please call a roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney.
No,
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Costin.
No.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn.
No.
Mayor Carlson.
Yes.
Mr. Reeds.
yes,
And Don, this is Mike Redlinger joining virtually, and I'm voting no as well.
Thank you, Mike. And we
So
have
something that was
4 noes and 6 yeses.
Motion passes on a 6-4 vote. Mayor Carlson.
My next motion would be to approve the remaining bills.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to pay the remaining bills as presented by Mr. Costin. Is there any discussion? I have a motion to pay the remaining bills as submitted. Don, would you please call a roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney.
yes,
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Costin.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes,
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Yes.
Mayor Carlson.
Yes.
Mr. Reeds.
yes.
And that is everyone.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Mr. Steen.
Thank you. You know, really don't like going through this. Can we Can we get to some resolutions? We just get this done so we don't have to continue to come back and talk about this. I know it's time. It's just gonna take some time to do this. It'd be nice to get this behind us and move forward. That's my point. I'd love to do that, so. And however that's accomplished, we'll let the chair decide how she would like to get this accomplished.
If you'd like it to be on the finance committee, rather than the full board, or whatever's your pleasure. Mayor?
Yes, Mayor Dardis, I think it would be best vetted by our finance committee first, and then it can make the finance committee can make a recommendation to the full board.
Okay, I will have conversation with Mr. Paulson and Mayor Mahoney as to how big that organization shall be, and we'll set up, we'll reach a mutual agreement. We don't need the entire finance committee, I don't believe, but I would certainly take input as to who would be critical of this. Obviously, probably Mr. Costin would be critical to be on that committee for an understanding, but that'll be forthcoming then. Item number 6 is the finance report. Mr. Costin.
Yeah, if you turn to page 28 of 142, our cumulative financial report is presented here. I just wanted to point out, based upon discussion at the last meeting, the complicated nature of evolving our financial plan is rolling into the financial statements. So you'll notice a new Fund 770. That is the administrative budget that is paying for all the staff costs to run the diversion authority on the near right side. And then there's one called an excess capital fund that's called out in the master indenture of trust for that, and that represents what is being paid to the city for fiscal agent duties at that point. So that's the reason why there's new funds appended on to the end, just for clarity. Then for the report with regard to that, the cumulative spend is $721,990,939. And down below, there's some other financing sources and uses, and basically those are just transfers in between those three funds. We're operating multiple funds now. We'll continue to expand as the master indenture of trust matures, so we might have to shrink this financial report to fit onto one page eventually. But so that's the cumulative, and the same thing with regard to page 29. The statement of net position is pretty straightforward. We covered that last meeting, and it's $103,687,246 is our net position. So we have a fair amount of liquidity in the project at this point. With regard to spending, it looks like we're at about 42% of spend. Joel will touch on that as he gets through his, so that would be the conclusion of my report.
Thank you, Mr. Costin. Mr. Steen.
Just a quick question, Ken, back a page or two here. And I know you've probably answered this question. What's the column budget fund? I know it's a small number, and I'm.
Okay, so the budget fund is the technical name that's contained within the master indenture trust agreement that John Shockley so carefully crafted. That's basically the administrative budget. So Joel and all his staff, the rent for the facility, the copy machine, the mailing, the postage, the marketing, those types of things are being called out in that accounting, partially because, according to Mr. Shockley, that the other parties of interest to this transaction want to make sure that we don't spend feverishly on our administrative costs and therefore lower the share that's available to those that are actually digging the ditch. And so therefore, the accounting protocol has to be broken out so that somebody that's a party of interest would be able to look at that budget and just say, this is what it is, this is what we're spending. And also, there is a cap of this administrative budget within the master indenture of trust. So it's something to keep your eye on. And Joel is so keenly aware of how this works and is involved in developing that budget. And so it'll continue to be reported out this way. We've had some discussion with Jacobs because they are the ones that actually prepare these reports about presentation. And I guess because it's still, in my mind, we haven't closed the loop on disclosure, would you like that administrative budget formatted in a line item type detail, much like you would see in your city, so that you can see that Joel's spending X amount on staff, X amount on rent. You know, it doesn't do a lot of good for transparency if you call it out and just say, well, they spent $84,000 this month. Well, what was that for? It holds Joel and his team accountable to the budget that's being approved. So I guess I would recommend that we develop a format that can be easily discerned by all parties involved, and that it not be disclosed as just a simple lump sum on the financial statement.
Okay, thank you.
I couldn't agree more.
So there'll be an activity report. Right now, it's kind of the balance sheet, or the net. Okay, all right, thanks.
Are there any additional questions of Mr. Costin on the finance report?
Just quick questions on loans. Have
Mayor?
we paid off the Wells Fargo loan?
Yes, that was defeased about a month ago,
And then we advanced 35 million to the upstream coalition.
That first obligation has been paid, 35 million, yes.
And then I know the county's been going crazy on sales tax. The numbers are higher than we expected. I think the city is doing higher in sales tax with the expectation of 1.5, and we're close to 8, 9. You guys are 12, 13. I don't even know how high you are. How does that reflect in our revenue? Does that somehow come out so we know that we're actually ahead on revenue on our sales tax? Is there any, I just don't know where it's in your report, Kent.
Page.
Yeah, those are being disclosed in the cumulative report. You know, City of Fargo, Cass County, that all comes from sales tax. So if you look on page 28, you can see the growth in those payments.
For those who can't see the small print, can you point that out, or?
I can now.
Yeah, it's the first two lines of the financial statement. City of Fargo, Cass County, so you can see that 32 million or 30 million, 32 million, 15 million. That's, if you look at the history, that's consistent. Prior to that, in 16, there were some capital financing transactions, so those aren't consistent. But so if your question is there a report that succinctly measures the budgeted receipts against what we've got, I'd say page 30 of 142 would show that. Because if you go right there, we budgeted 32 million for City of Fargo, we budgeted 16 million for Cass County. You see the monthly totals to the right, and then you see the fiscal year to date. So, yeah, I'm looking at that Cass County figure that,
I'll help
Your
clear.
report on the page before didn't look correct for the county either.
I'll help clarify that number with Cass County. So that includes the money that came from the temporary improvement refunding bond.
thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, so they issued the debt, they remitted
good
it
though,
to
Joe.
us. And that's a good point. We've been tracking who's been putting the money in, and maybe not so much as what's the source of funds. And so maybe that should be split out and called City of Fargo sales tax, Cass County sales tax. And then down below, there would be other financing sources, which would be debt proceeds. So we can clean that up. I apologize for that. We probably should have thought of that, but
Thank you, Mr. Costin. Go back, would you go back to the other page where you had the multiple lines? And if you could explain 2021, 2021 Cass County, why that number is so off compared to what, except for back in 2013, the 7 million.
well, because it's only mid-year.
Okay.
It's half a year essentially, or it's through July. So,
Okay.
I mean, as that proceeds on, you'll see it fulfill its way up to the budget, which was 16 million.
Okay.
That's a timing issue with regard to the month of being reported. The 28, Joel, thank you for your comment. It looks like we did revise the Cass County Joint Water Resource District. If you look in 2021, the 28,630,000, that was because of those temporary bonds that we advanced the funds to the diversion. So I think what the issue is the synchronization of page 30, the financial report, to the cumulative report, and making that all aligned. We'll work on that this month.
The point I'm trying to make, Mr. Costin, is when I've seen all of the sales tax reports, we've been running ahead.
Yeah.
Cass County, West Fargo, Fargo have all been running ahead. And if you look at that, it doesn't appear that on this summary, we're about where we're normal at. It doesn't seem like there's anywhere from like a 7 to 9% increase that I've been tracking. That's my whole point.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a reporting from what I'm looking at to what, you're.
Well, the other thing to know is that there's a 2-month lag in the sales tax collections from the time it hits the cash register until the time the treasurer remits it to us. At the end of the year, we make an accrual adjustment to accrue those last 2 months. So you do catch up and we'll hit that budgeted figure. So if you're going cash to cash all year long, and I do want to say those sales tax receipts have really increased. I think Fargo's was 12 to 14% and the county's was almost 20%. That's phenomenal. But good point in what you're saying, that's not being flagged out individually
Sure,
so that
okay.
everybody's aware. And maybe that's something the finance committee wants to consider.
I just know that Joel and John and everybody's been working real hard on what we're doing in our adjustments, but we were at 1.5% basically assumption. And that's over 3 years. I mean, we're gonna find, as we go here, we'll take the good times now, but then it's a little bit more of a cushion to carry us as maybe we go back down again. But it's fantastic. We should be able, John, to bring all those projects in we took out. No. No, but to Rick's point, usually we kind of like to know where we are currently because there's assumptions by some people we will have trouble sustaining or doing the things, and it's good news in the community that we're doing very well right now in spite of a lot of factors that are in the community, so.
Well, I was aware that we're doing very well on the sales tax collection, but the report doesn't quite jive with that, so everybody should rest assured we're doing extremely well on sales tax collection as compared to forecast, is the point I was trying to make. Okay. Any additional questions of Mr. Costa? Mr. Paulson?
Mr. Chair, I'll just add on to what Mayor Mahoney had mentioned, and I think it's actually more of a benefit that we're seeing this increase in sales tax at this moment as we're starting into implementation. Through the Master Indenture of Trust, you have reserve funds that fill up as the dollars flow in. So any increase above and beyond that 1.5% that we were considering in our financial plan begins to fill those reserve funds. And so it's an important time, I guess, right when you start to get that in place. And that's not something that happens over a longer period of time. So I think that's also a benefit.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. Additional questions of Mr. Costin's finance report? Could I have a motion to approve?
Mr. Chair, I move to approve the finance report.
Thank you, Commissioner Steen. Is there a second, please?
I'll second.
This is Dave.
you.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Don, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Dardis,
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney,
Aye.
Mr. Jacobson,
Yes.
Mr. Costin,
Yes?
Ms. Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger,
Yes.
Mr. Steen,
Yes.
Mr. Papcorn,
Aye.
Mayor Carlson,
Yes.
Mr. Reeds.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. Motion passes. And item number 7 is the Executive Director's Financial Report. Mr. Paulson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You'll see the overall status for this month. Overall cost to date, as Mr. Costin had mentioned, $721,990,000. As you can see, our annual cash budget for 2021 versus our cost to date, and again, this is a mid-year basically report here. We're still tracking very well, under budget on all the items with the exception of the third-party MOU mitigation. And, that is related to the settlement agreement and the first payment that, as Mr. Costin had mentioned, has been paid to the upstream JPA. And then we've also been having much more success achieving MOUs, especially with the townships. We'll have one coming up here at the board meeting for consideration tomorrow with Stanley Township, which I'd like to thank Mr. Bakigard for his hard work on getting that in place. And so Chris has been extremely successful, so we're actually going to be tracking over budget on that item as we move forward a little bit, but we can certainly find some budget adjustment to cover that in some other areas where we found some savings. So I'll just move on to the Tier 2 overall status, and I like to scroll through here and see if there's any questions. Not much has really changed between this month and last month. Still, a majority of our expenditures are on lands and the program manager getting us through the procurement phase. So you can see we're still tracking well under budget for many of these items. I've moved to page number 2 here. And the only one that, and Mr. Chair, you got me on this last month, the only one that's over budget with the appearances under land acquisition and mitigation. And as we discussed that item, really has to do with the timing of acquiring properties. And we really had a lot of properties this year, more than we expected, that some of those should have come on board last year. And so that's where we're seeing that budget overrun on that item. I'll go to the next page. Mr. Chair and members of the Finance Committee, I think we're still tracking very well for the year. We're going to start to see a lot of activity with the P3 developer towards the end of the year, and we're still moving forward very aggressively with our lands program, ensuring that we're acquiring the lands necessary for the core projects as anticipated. So certainly take any questions. I got one more page I want to show, and this has been requested in the past, and we did review this with Mr. Chair and the Vice Chair. This is really a summary that I intend to include in the Executive Director updates on a monthly basis to the Finance Committee, and this is a list of budget adjustments that occurred, and so we had 3 budget adjustments occur this last month. It's basically a cash budget allocation. The first one was to support HMG's services for the I-29 grade raise project. That task order was approved by the board. We unencumbered $155,000 out of HMG's permitting task order and allocated it to the I-29 grade raise task order. The second one was a transfer to support really an effort to make Pleasant Township happy. They requested some roads to be re-gravelled prior to next spring, and so we unencumbered $9,000 out of the debt service budget and moved that to cover. And that was something that if we would have had to wait for approvals, we wouldn't have been able to get that work done. And we had IBI wrap that in with our wetland mitigation project in Oxbow. So we already had a contractor on site. It just made sense. And then the third one is really just splitting the DCAI or the channel utility relocates and allocating dollars to the Southern Embankment utility relocation budget. We had $0 for the utility relocation budget in our cash budget this year. And again, Mr. Bakigard and the tech team has really been making a lot of progress on utility MOUs and utility relocates. So we're taking from what we had anticipated for the channel utility relocate and allocating $2.7 million to the Southern Embankment. So I will be providing this in the future for all those budget changes for the Finance Committee's awareness. And if you have any comments on the format, I can certainly change it up a little bit, but I think it encompasses the information that would be pertinent for your consideration.
I want to thank you for doing that. That was a request of the Finance Committee that the effect that the budget reallocations had on our overall budget. So I'm fine with the format. It's a good report to have. It just keeps everybody on the Finance Committee aware of what those changes, the effects they have. Are there any additional questions for Mr. Paulson?
Two questions.
Steve.
I think Joel too, and I don't know this because it's been a long time since I've looked at it, but maybe take a look at the JPA, and I'm not sure if budget changes require approval. I'm not even sure, but I know there's something about budget changes in the JPA, and I don't know the detail. John's reaching for it right now, but anyway, But just some, in case we are supposed to take some action on approving, I don't know if we are or not.
Yep.
And the second question, this is, and I'm not unhappy with this at all, but on page 1 of the level 2 detail, annual budget for management, legal, financial, and procurement. 17 million budget, we're only at about 5 million. Like I said, I'm not unhappy with that, but what's the significant difference? Is it all in procurement?
A lot of that is related to the timing of when we procured the P3 contractor. If you recall, last year we were planning on procuring that contractor much earlier in 2021. Through multiple, delays in that process for very good reason. That pushed the procurement of the Red River Valley Alliance out later, about mid-year instead of early this year. So in our budgeting for 2021, we had anticipated a higher level of activity with the Red River Valley Alliance, starting, this fall and actually moving into some construction potentially this fall. Right now, because of the timing, it does look like the Red River Valley Alliance will begin limited activities that we've given them approval for, such as survey, mobilization, but really we won't see any real construction.
Right, but wouldn't that be under channel construction line versus procurement, legal, and financial? That's what I'm getting at.
I guess it's a good
You got some help in
question.
the background there.
That's a good
You got
question.
some help.
I'll let John,
Mr.
well, maybe
Shockley,
let John jump in.
Mr. Shockley would like to have some input in this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board, and I think this is actually probably a good news story. When we were planning the budget for the P3 procurement, we had taken a conservative approach because we didn't know what was going on with the litigation. And we were actually concerned that we would have an extended procurement, and the longer your procurement goes, it burns a lot of money. And so this is a good news story that we actually, because we were able to reach the settlement agreement, get the procurement done sooner, we didn't burn through as much budget. Okay. And we wanted to be conservative on the procurement budget because all of the consultants on the P3 procurement side, they have high hourly rates and you can really burn through your budget pretty quickly. And so we tried to be conservative, but because where we are, it's a good thing.
All right, great. That's what I was hoping. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. How about the JPA question with regard to? Still looking, okay.
I had one.
Mr. Costa,
I had
please.
one question. Maybe just a clarification on page 48 of 142. The amount that's listed for Buffalo River mitigation at $35,250,000. Is that actual? Because I'm sitting here thinking about what we just talked about, the payment being made to the Wilkin group. Is that labeled correctly?
That is the label that we're using. So Buffalo River was a party to the JPA settlement agreement.
So it's just a labeling issue.
Yep, and Buffalo River was a recipient of a portion of the funds, and so we've labeled it under that work package mitigation project as Buffalo River mitigation versus Richland Wilkin JPA, basically.
Well, it would seem logical to me to call it out in the financial report that this went to the counterparty as opposed to being buried under Buffalo River. It looks like a mitigation project. I would recommend that we delineate that in the budget and show it straight up so that we're very transparent about what was paid.
I don't disagree, but I'll probably defer to General Counsel Shockley. He was the one that set this all up, so maybe he has some comments as to why we're tracking it under the Buffalo River mitigation.
Again, we'll ask Mr. Shockley to respond to that.
John, you might just stand up there.
Actually, on this issue,
Mike's not on.
I didn't turn it off. So.
There you go.
Oh, okay. I think it was just tracked this way because the payment went out under the Buffalo Red River Watershed District. That was probably out. I think you could break it out more if you wanted to. I don't think there was any particular magic to. I know it's under a mitigation project because it's part of mitigation, but I suppose you could put it as upstream mitigation.
Well, I mean, I think it's a significant issue from a disclosure standpoint, and once it's over and the payment's made, people are gonna quickly forget what happened. And so it seems to me that it should be broken out separately, because if Buffalo River got 250 grand and the other counterparty got 35 million, it's being commingled. So I would suggest we pay attention to that.
I'll also note, this is available. I have sent out the link, and I'll do it again because maybe Finance Committee and Board, have lost this in their email, but the Finance Committee and the Board has access to this report at any time. You can click on and go in. There is a level 3 detail that breaks these out farther. I only present level 1 and 2. It's the same information in level 1 and 2, but it gets continued broken down as you move down into that. I don't know. We do have the ability to pull it up, but I would guess level 3 detail has it line itemed out.
Which one?
Mr. Chair,
Please.
do we
Mayor.
have the ability to pull it up at that level 3 detail just to see if it is in there?
I just asked Peggy.
I know.
I can pull it up on my computer, but my computer's not.
Oh.
And the only reason I bring it up is because level 3 rarely gets visited by anybody on this committee.
Yes, sir.
I
Yeah.
have never, well,
I knew
shouldn't
where you were
say I
going
have
with that.
never, but I occasionally look at level 3 detail, but when things start to get rolled up to a high level, it starts to lose its meaning.
I think we can easily make the change, Mr. Costin.
I would support Ken's
I do too.
position on that.
I agree. All right. Any additional questions for Mr. Paulson? Mr. Paulson's report is for information only. It's not an actionable item. Having no further questions, we'll move on to item number 8, is the contracting actions. Mr. Paulson, Executive Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you, is your preference to take these one at a time with discussion and roll call vote, or shall I go through them all, take questions?
Why don't we go through your summary of each of these, and then I'll ask the committee at the end of that if there's any specific that we want to break out
Okay.
at the end. We'll deal with it at the end.
Sounds great. So task order number 101, amendment 0, is really combining 7 open task orders that HMG has. There's been some analysis. We've been managing at one time or another over 32 task orders for HMG. Quite a lot of administrative time to pick through the invoices when they submit them. It really is inconsistent with how we're contracting with our consultants. A2S and Jacobs, our other 2 large consultants on the program, have just a couple task orders with many different types of services contained under there. So I did task Mr. Chris Bachigard with working with HMG to classify their existing task orders that are active into more of a broad classification. And they did come back and recommended 2 task orders, is task order 101 and task order 102, which is your second item on there. Both of them can contain 7 existing task orders, and it's combining it into these 2 task orders. So these aren't any additional funds being expended, not any additional budget being adjusted here. It's taking existing task orders and combining them into one with the intent of efficiency in billing and administrative related to the contracts that we have with HMG.
On our oversight, is it still as easy to track the specific task orders, though?
Absolutely. So Chris and others are still going through all of the activities that happen. So we get an invoice with the person that worked on it the day they worked on it, a comment of what they're working on, and then it'll be contained under one of these 2 task orders with an indication of whether it's design and construction or H&H mitigation and permitting support.
And there's no net gain in budgeted dollars?
No. So it basically is giving us the ability to do budget adjustments at the subtask level without having to bring those forward to the finance committee. However, they'll still be reported out to the finance committee. But as you recall, every month we have an HMG amendment or budget change, and so it's preparing all that for finance, but it's also administrating all those task orders. And Chris spends a lot more time on the HMG side than he does on AE2S and Jacobs, just because the workflow process is so robust, having to manage the 32 different task orders. So this is really, I think all transparency is maintained through this, but it gives us the ability to save a lot of time and effort on just administrating the billing and the review of the billing and the administration for the task orders. The third one is task order number 2, amendment 4. This is work for AECOM. AECOM is our consultant that is doing the archaeological work and historic mitigation work. So this is work that is supporting basically all of the archaeological actions for the program. Did review this. This supports our cemetery work, which is related to the settlement agreement, as well as historic structures and doing all the cultural evaluations. And we have used AECOM for quite some time on this task. And so this is just another task order for the next batch of cultural and historic evaluations that need to be done. The fourth contracting action for consideration by the Finance Committee is the utility relocation agreement with Wild Rice River, or for the Wild Rice River structure. And this is for Dakota Carrier Network to relocate a line impacted by the Wild Rice control structure. The non-federal sponsor is currently responsible under the PPA for utility relocates. And so this would be an agreement with DCN. The last contracting action for consideration is change order 4 for work package 43G. This is to furnish and replace gravel on 49th Street Southeast. This is really down in the Camel Hump area, and again, this is another action that was requested by the townships because we're cutting off access to certain roads down there. And so this would be for industrial builders to bring in gravel and take minimum maintenance road to a gravel road standard for field to market activities that would occur this fall and next spring due to the removal of access in that area. So I will certainly open it up for any questions that the Finance Committee might have.
And this is township jurisdiction on these roads, not county?
That's correct.
Okay. Are there any questions from Mr. Paulson on his contracting actions? Items 1 through 5.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Steen.
I'll move to approve contracting actions 1 through 5.
Thank you. Is there a second, please?
Second.
Jacobson, second.
Dan Jacobson seconds. Been moved and seconded to approve the contracting actions as presented by Mr. Paulson's items 1 through 5 in their entirety. Is there any further discussion? Items 1 through 5, all in one vote. Hearing none. Don, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes.
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Costin.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Ridlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Aye.
Mayor Carlson.
Yes.
Mr. Reeds.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. Motion passes. Item number 9, other business. DA Board approved MOUs and agreement actions. Mr. Shockley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Finance Committee. Today you have before you 2 MOUs, both with townships. This is in addition to the comments that Joel had made regarding Mr. Bakkegaard's work with the townships. Through that work, we've negotiated 2 MOUs, one with Normanna and one with Stanley Township, regarding the construction, operation, and maintenance associated with the project. This allows the project to continue to go forward, working with the townships. I can certainly answer any questions that you have. In summary, we're reimbursing them for some costs and expenses that are included within the construction work every year for the diversion channel. That's up to $3,000 per year annually. That would be for, like if there's more gravel needed on the road, if they need to put up signage, items like that. And then any consultant fees and a one-time lump sum payment for lost tax revenue of $2,600 for Normanna, and then a similar payment, but larger for Stanley Township because they have more impacts from the comprehensive project. Certainly happy to answer any questions. Chris has been on the ground, tip of the spear, so to speak, and so he could answer any questions regarding the actual meetings with the townships.
Can you define the last line in each of the paragraphs, the lost tax revenue?
Yeah.
I don't understand that.
So as the project has been taking property for the project, the actual, like the channel, the southern embankment, it comes in the public ownership. There had been some long-term discussions within the Diversion Authority and its member entities about the impact of removing parcels from being tax-generating parcels. Through those discussions, I think there's somewhat of a misperception in how much tax revenue a quarter section of farmland actually generates because of the way that North Dakota values property. It's based upon productivity rather than market value. And so the reality is a quarter section doesn't really generate that much tax value. And so that's the idea was to, instead of having an ongoing obligation to reimburse the townships in perpetuity, we'd give them a one-time reimbursement for this lost tax revenue for the long-term effects of the project. And I think that's a better way. It better manages the authority's liabilities rather than having an ongoing obligation. I think with the Cass County Joint Board, with the Maple River Dam project, they have an ongoing obligation and they're reimbursing for lost tax revenue. And that was something that internally within the Diversion Authority, and I think as a policy standpoint, that we really disfavored that long-term obligation, because right now sales taxes are doing quite well, but in 30 years, who knows how they're going to be doing.
Great explanation. Thank you, John. Any other questions for Mr. Shockley? This is an actionable item. Mayor, did you have a question?
No, I just was going to move to approve these MOU and agreement actions.
Mayor Carlson moves to approve the MOUs and agreements. Is there a second, please?
Second, Mahoney.
Mayor Mahoney seconds, been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Don, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Dardis.
Yes?
Dr. Mahoney.
Aye.
Mr. Jacobson.
Yes.
Mr. Costin.
Yes.
Ms. Johnson.
Yes.
Mr. Redlinger.
Yes.
Mr. Steen.
Yes.
Mr. Pepcorn.
Aye.
Mayor Carlson.
Yes.
Mr. Reeds.
Yes.
That is everyone.
Thank you, Don. Next order of business is property acquisition status report. Call on Mr. Eric Dodds, AE2S.
Good afternoon, committee members. Peggy, if you could go to the next slide, please. So this is the overall status map for this month. I usually like to just draw your attention to this page, maybe point out a few items. In the past month, we have had 2 of our eminent domain actions get settled before trial, so that number has gone down a couple. Happy to report that. We continue to acquire a handful of properties each month, and so the green shaded parcels have increased. I think it was 5 or 6 in the past month here. So continuing to make some progress. As you can see, there's a lot of shaded parcels south of town. We continue to be working on negotiations for the Drain 27 wetland project. We've got a couple lingering parcels for the Red River Control Structure, and we are actively working on the SE2A portion of the southern embankment. All of the orange parcels upstream are appraisal work associated with the flow easement study, and been meeting with our flow easement team. They anticipate being done with those valuations later this year. So the rest of the report just drills into each area in particular. Information for your viewing, and happy to stand for any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Mr. Dodds. Are there questions for him? Anyone?
I just have just a quick observation, if I may, and I'm assuming this is the answer. Along I-29, that's kind of an unusual piece there because you've got a couple of acquired through last resort eminent domain, but I'm assuming that's due to the I-29 road raise specifically.
That is correct. We did acquire a few properties voluntarily for I-29. We also had a few that we had to use eminent domain action for those, yep.
Thanks.
Additional questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next meeting is going to be September 22nd. I have a brief comment that I want to make about with regard to the bill questions and discussions we took place. As the chairman of the Finance Committee, I have the opportunity to review the bills as they come in. And I wanted to say that despite the discussion that took place today, Mr. Costin and your team does a marvelous job. You know, obviously, we have a policy thing that we need to address. So I want to clarify that to anybody, to the public, anybody that's watching here. There's not an issue with regard to the fine work that you folks have been doing for a very long period of time, okay? So, but we as a board need to clear up a policy issue, and I hope that you don't take any of this other than for what it is, that the politicians maybe didn't get the administration done right, sir.
Well, I must say, I've been here 35 years and I hold no grudges. And the credit with regard to the ongoing work goes to my staff. Jamie Bullock is our primary accountant that deals with the fiscal agent arrangement and the work with the State Water Commission, and she's awesome. She's on top of all of this, has an extensive knowledge of the whole system. So kudos to Jamie. I'm sure she's not listening, but we couldn't get through this without her. So.
Very good, sir. Well, I think that needed to be said, so there was no misunderstandings about what this whole process is about. Mayor Mahoney.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you for those comments. I would like to bring up an issue of our financial director that we're hiring for the DA board. We recently had 2 vacancies in our finance department. We had 30 applications. We had 5 great candidates, and we'll be able to fill. Our salary range is well below 120. Kent? Below 120?
Yeah, we have a senior accountant position, and I think it's range from about 75 to 90. And that's somebody that can do extensive amount of accounting, core accounting work, financial reporting, reconciliation, that type of thing, as opposed to a directorship, which would be much higher. But we were impressed with the quality of the candidates and the pool from which we were able to pick. We were surprised, quite frankly, and delighted in the talent that applied.
I would ask, we've looked at different aspects of that, Joel, and I think we've had a 120 to 140 range. I would ask the chair and the vice chair sit down with you, figure out a range, and fill that position. I think we're losing time, and we're really into the project right now. I think it'd be very helpful to your team as well. I know John's doing a lot of the financial work right now, but I think for the team, we really should consider, Mayor Carlson, let's get this thing going. There's no reason. Now, Bernie and I talked about this a little bit, and he's worried just about where it fits in your team, Joel, just because of your salaries of many of the other members. But I think we'll get qualified candidates at the range we could presently go with, and I think you need the help. I just would be start to help to do the different things. And then I want to congratulate you because you're going to give Mike and Robert more work to do to look at contracts. So I think that's like 1,000 contracts. So really pleased that we're going to spread the wealth. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Shockley has something for the group.
I just thought under other business, I would give a note of congratulations to the Finance Committee. Last week, we reached commercial close on the P3 contract. The final hurdle is financial close, which is currently set for October, around October 8th, which would be early. They have until mid-November to close. So just positive news. Good. Thought it would be a good way to end the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Shockley. We have no misgivings that where the credit really goes rather than to the Finance Committee. Back to you, Mr. Shockley. You've done an amazing job on getting us to where we are today. So there's no misgivings that the Finance Committee takes credit for this. So thank you. Again, our next meeting is September 22nd. We have no further business. Madam Chairman, anything to add?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
We stand adjourned. Thank you.